So, Jeff, how are you?
I'm great.
I'm fantastic.
And Jim?
Excellent. How are you?
Awesome. So I guess the very first question I have is, like, whose idea was it, and why did you decide to start a Boston VR meetup?
Oh, okay, I could take that one. So it was really, it was Mark Stock who clicked the button initially on meetup.com and put in the $30, I think it was at the time. I met Mark at another meetup. I was going to the HPC GPU, the High Performance Computing meetup in Cambridge. Usually met at Nerd. And my complaint with that was that they never did graphic stuff. There was no eye candy. You know, it was always scientific. And so Mark was there presenting something very graphically, rich. It was a fluid simulation of helicopter blades, which is, absurdly complex. So I approached him after this presentation and told him I was doing this art project with falling leaves, but I couldn't get the motion right. I wanted them to sort of twirl in the wind and, get the perfect skill set. So we started hacking on this thing pretty regularly. Turns out we lived in the same town, so that helped. And then, he was there for the DK1 unboxing when it came in. So I guess I kind of consider that the first meetup, two people in a room and VR. I think it counts.
So it was just the two of you?
Sorry?
It was just the two of you in a room unboxing? Is that the first meetup?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it certainly was a significant moment in my mind. I still remember that feeling. It was pretty awesome. The Tuscany demo, the fireplace, the rafters. Yeah, it was cool. So, one of those days, I just kind of mentioned, hey, somebody should really start a meetup about this, and so that night, man of action, he did. Got good attendance at Nerd for the first one, 50 people or so. Everybody brought their stuff. Everybody had a demo. It was great. It was a LAN party. We were lugging our gear up from the parking garage, like the humongous chassis and the 28-inch monitors. Like, everybody's dragging this stuff into the building. That was a ton of fun. But for whatever reason, they wouldn't have us back. Maybe they were just booked, or we couldn't book that space again. So we tried to kind of diversify a little bit, and then I did probably the only real action I did for the meetup was to find the Venture Cafe venue and bring a demo rig out there to show them, so they'd let us have the meetup there. And I think it served us well for a long time. And then and that's where we met Jeff Bale, I believe, at the second meetup, right?
I was at the first one. I was showing my flight simulator. Yeah.
That was before me.
Excellent.
Jim, I first met you at the Nerd Center for the Oculus funded meetup. What did he call it?
Right.
Yeah.
Meetup number 0. That one was huge. They were there. Palmer was there. It was
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, that was long before Facebook bought them.
Yeah, Ben Cavallari put that together.
Yes, he did. And that kind of, from what I could see, that really started the public face of VR, in the larger community.
And I guess for the record on Microsoft, we did go back actually to the Nerd Center when Altspace came to town, and we got their huge room, which was fantastic. I think I've heard that's now under construction or something, but we're still trying to get booked back in there. They tend to get real excited, and then things kind of fall through. It's a very contested venue. We got a lot of local indie gaming groups that meet up there, and it's hard to get in there, but I hope to get back there again sometime.
The first meetup I went to was March 2014, and that was like your third meetup, something like that. It was at Hack Reduce. That was neat. And then a couple of meetups later, I called up all my old VR friends, and they stuffed the room with a lot of fun stuff, including Annette brought her dome down from New Hampshire. That was pretty popular. Yes.
And for people who don't know what a dome is, can you describe that?
Oh, that's it's an inflatable dome made of canvas. You can stuff it in the the trunk of your car, and you blow it up with a carpet fan, and it makes a miniature planetarium. You have a projector and a little mirror rig for it, and there's thousands of these crisscrossing North America, going to elementary schools, showing mostly planetarium films. But in my earlier days, we were using the dome for interactive Unity-based content. That was fun.
And when he says miniature, this thing I think was 30 feet across.
Yeah.
And the space we had it in, Hack Reduce, was really one of my favorite venues for meetups.
It was awesome.
This was an old, well, it still is, a former boiler factory from probably the early 1800s. And unfortunately, Hack Reduce has kind of moved on to a different space, and we haven't been back there. But the room that we had was huge, and it could easily accommodate this 30-foot dome. It had nice high ceilings. I think we had to pull up some of the lamps that were hanging down. But the cool part is we had a lot of other demos that time, and they all kind of arranged themselves all around the outside of this dome. He had some great new demos there. I remember the one guy had the musical experience. I think you knew who he was, Jeff, where it was like tracking his motions and making music. There was just so many new things back then.
Yes.
It was really exciting time.
He had a Walk on the Sun. I can't remember his name because I'm bad with names. But you could walk on a map of the sun, and a different instrument would play data from different sensors aimed at the sun. And somehow it was always beautiful. It's an amazing display. Marty.
So it looks like everyone a part of that founding has either continued to be a part of the meetups or got a job in VR. So Jeff Bale, I know you're working in healthcare VR. So how did you go from organizing a meetup to getting a full-time professional job in the industry?
Well, I had spent the most of my career in military simulation. And so I had lots of exposure to VR over the years. I went to some incredible places and saw some incredible systems early on in VR, well before Palmer Luckey was probably even in high school. I went to the Industrial Virtual Reality trade show in Tokyo, and there I was able to try the latest models from Sensix that had just an amazing field of view and of course very basic graphics back then, but that really got me excited about the technology. But although all the products that I worked on in military simulation were prefixed with VR, because that was kind of like in the 80s we had Turbo, and in the 90s everything was VR. So we named all our products VR Forces and VR Vantage and all this stuff, and they were running on PCs, and there wasn't really PC-based VR just yet. And I was able to take my DK1 and get it integrated with our what's called image generator software, and then I put together a little flight simulation demo, and that's what I showed at the very first Boston VR meetup. And that's how I really got started in VR. But my passion has always been healthcare. Seeing some of the godfathers of this, like Walter Greenleaf and Skip Rizzo, do some talks at places like SVVR. At the first SVVR, I saw Walter Greenleaf there, and some great medical content over the years at IEEE VR, and it was just something I knew I had to do.
Awesome. And Jeff Jacobson, you are a little bit even more interesting, I would say, because you started out in academics and were very much a part of getting VR where it is today. And so how long ago was it when you first started doing VR?
In the Jurassic period. I first, in 1991, I got tired of hacking operating systems at Honeywell, and I hit the road just looking for something new. And I ran into a professor of architecture who was doing VR, Michael Benedict. So I've been involved in VR since 1991. By that time, VR had been around for 25 years, and it was all military and very high-end academic labs, and the gear is super expensive. So I didn't want to go into the military, so I went for a PhD and dragged it out as long as I could. And so I was literally one of like a dozen researchers looking into VR for education, learning in immersive VR, and I was also involved in VR for cultural heritage and history. So after I graduated, I started a think tank living on or trying to live on research grants, National Endowment for Humanities, National Science Foundation. The dome that Annette brought, that was from our old project for her virtual forest, where kids could do a virtual field trip through a forest modeled in Unity.
So is that Think Tank public VR?
That is public VR, yes. And so it's very interesting history, old as new. When the Oculus came out, I realized the world was going to change because I had lived through the hype and crash cycle of VR in the early 90s, and then another hype and crash cycle around 2000. And both of those frustrated everybody because in the early 90s, nobody could afford any gear of any kind. In the 2000s, there was cheap available gear, but it was just garbage. It just didn't work. But I could see that the Oculus was going to be great, and that was going to change everything. So I started to shut down public VR, and I just stopped taking in any new research projects, and I got involved in in Boston VR, and I started my own company consulting, which I call Enterprise VR. It's this nice symmetry to these things. Well, Jeff was managing Boston VR through his own personal bank account, and it was starting to get too difficult. We were kind of needed to incorporate. And here's Public VR, this great nonprofit with a long history, not doing anything. So we brought Boston VR under Public VR's umbrella. And now Public VR has become Boston VR and vice versa.
But the nonprofit side of things, I think, is really important to us. We don't want to be beholden to any corporation, be it Oculus or Microsoft or HTC, and have to favor their products and technology. We like to be completely independent, and we like to be able to tell people, that any contributions they make are going to go towards more awesome VR events in Boston, and I think that's really worked out well for us. It's not unique. In fact, I learned recently, I think VRLA is also a nonprofit, and I think it's a great way to have kind of independent meetups and allow people to do whatever they want and bring whatever demos they want and, just have a great time.
We, right from spring of 2014, right up until almost 9 months ago, Boston VR was it. We were the only game in town you could go for VR or AR. And then suddenly Boston AR, run by Neil, starting with the HoloLens hackathon, was suddenly there and getting attendance of 100 people. And then VR events are just popping up all over the city. And we had been talking about this for the last year. And we could have tried to make Boston VR into an empire, where everything is under our umbrella, but we just didn't want to do that, So now we're still kind of the largest, but we're settling into doing what we always did originally. We're kind of this unstructured, informal romper room where anybody can bring their finished product, their half-baked idea, just come bring your toys and play. And I think that's a really important niche or role for us.
I'd like to read our About Us off our Meetup page, which now I realize is a little bit out of date these days. But it was important back in those days to be able to allow people to try VR because you couldn't go to Best Buy and try it. So that was one of our primary missions, is just to allow the public to come and try it and experience it for themselves. So this is written and kind of rewritten over the years, but it's just pretty short, and I think it kind of talks about what we are and what we do. So it says, we're here to talk about, program, share, and demonstrate software, hardware, and ideas for the upcoming new wave of virtual reality. Whether you're an avatar who spends more time in virtual worlds than the real one, or someone who's never even worn a head-mounted display, you'll find a great group of people who love VR. Each month, we bring in presenters from companies who are pioneering VR technology and also feature an array of demonstrations created by our local VR developers. They can help you embark comfortably on your first VR experience or dive deep into VR design and discuss the latest news from the fast-changing world of VR. We are a government-certified 501c3 nonprofit organization, which means that all ticket fees and donations are dedicated to putting on more VR events in Boston, and that all donations are tax-deductible. So I think this upcoming new wave has hit. I guess depends who you ask. So parts of that need to be updated, but I think it's an interesting look into what we were thinking back in 2014.
Wow.
Still sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yep. It was Jim who showed me how to organize these events, which is the exact opposite of what I was used to, because I'd organize lots and lots of academic events, with a lot of control over everything. And the way we've organized Boston VR is to sort of not organize it. We're sort of just responding to what the crowd wants, almost. Yeah.
I feel like back in the day, I kind of dragged us kicking and screaming. I think in Jim's case, Jim is a little bit PowerPoint phobic, should we say? And at that time, we were having a lot of fun just bringing our demos and showing our demos, and there was constantly new ones back then. And, all these different developers locally working on stuff. But eventually it became, each time I would bring my flight simulator and I'd maybe put a new feature in, here and there, but it was the same demos over and over. And I realized we needed to start, doing something new to bring in more people. And our very first presenter was Jaunt VR. And from there we started booking 2 each time. And I think it kind of eventually even allowed us to have themed meetups. Mm-hmm. We had a architecture meetup. We had 2 different medically themed meetups, and it really kind of allowed us to start bringing in more presenters and really getting the word out. That's how I think a lot of people started to hear about us.
People wanted talks.
Yeah. And another big move was when we started serving pizza.
Yeah. Yes.
We had a charge at the door, basically.
Always a free food.
Let that fire burn for a couple more hours every night.
Cymatic Bruce got us started on the pizza.
Yeah, I was so worried it was going to get on the HMDs. I was like, oh no, I don't want pizza grease on my lenses.
How would that happen?
He bought us pizza in our meetup on December 2014, and we were addicted ever since.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a great meetup, and Bruce has come back actually since then, and he's just a lot of fun to hang out with. One of the most passionate people about VR that I think I know. And I remember at that meetup, that was a funny moment because he walked in with just these 2 little rollerboard kind of bags, and it was almost like a clown car of VR. Because from these little bags, he poured out, I think, 4 working AltSpace VR setups, and everyone was trying it all at once. I mean, it was such a good time.
Awesome. So on the notes of good times, what's your favorite meetup, and I guess why? Or if you have an awesome story with a VR celeb like Will Mason, Lucky Palmer, John Carmack. If anyone has a story, or if you need a moment to think about it, we can jump over to how we pointed out how Boston Augmented Reality's popped up. So there's actually a really awesome story there. And I'll let Neil take it over about how Boston Augmented Reality came out of Boston Virtual Reality.
Cool, thanks. So I got involved with Boston Virtual Reality, I'm not even sure how long ago, maybe it was early 2015 or something like that. I had learned about VR and AR to some point at my old job at Draper, and I wanted to actually experience this stuff a lot more, so I found out about the meetup. I started coming to these events. I found that to what the Jeffs and what Jim has created here, it was such a cool community. It was more than just come and try VR and then go do your own thing. It was seeing the same people or creating cool relationships. So I got really involved with that community, and then because Boston VR got so big and was really the central point of VR and AR in Boston, Microsoft reached out to the group and asked if they would help coordinate a HoloLens hackathon, the new augmented reality device Microsoft was rolling out. And it was a few months before that, actually, that I had noticed in San Francisco and in New York, there were separate VR and AR groups. So I remember I pulled Jeff Bill to the side one time. I said, hey, I'm thinking of starting this kind of sister group, this augmented reality group. I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't know if it's going to cannibalize things. It works in those cities. It might not work here. And I still remember the look you gave me where you said, I would go register that right now. And it put the absolute fear in me that I need to do this thing immediately, strike while the iron is hot. So I think that night I went and I registered on Meetup, and I think it was up to $50 by then. So clearly inflation has taken course, right? And the Jeffs and Jim were very generous, where they said, look, Microsoft, we're happy to do this hackathon. Let's use this to jumpstart Boston AR. And that really is where Boston AR kind of stands on the shoulders of Boston VR. In terms of any success we have really comes from Boston VR creating this environment, creating this platform for Boston AR to leverage the same community, to leverage that excitement. Venues know about this because they've seen the success that Boston VR had. So it really made things a lot easier for Boston AR to come in and say, okay, we're representing another similar technology, but we're going to have a sort of a different feel to our events while still maintaining that nonprofit community feel. And that's kind of how the group first came about. So we've been around, I think officially a year now. We've only had 6 different events, and we're going to start doing a lot more of them. The consistent meetups, as well as there's some monthly events, and I'm going to start doing a kind of tour at the different colleges so that we can expose more students to this technology as well. A lot brewing there.
Well, we're really glad that you took over the hackathon. You did a great job, and it was just good for everybody. And we were kind of busting at the seams. We really needed to spread out, and that gave us a perfect way to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've had multiple conversations to make sure that we manage these groups in the right way, that the community still doesn't feel like, do I pick one or the other, or I've already seen stuff at Boston VR, why would I go to Boston AR or something like that. And so it's been kind of nice trying to figure that out exactly. How do we manage these two groups together and make sure it's a kind of positive experience no matter which one you go to or something like that. And one of the things we talked about, who knows if these groups end up merging together at some point, right? Because VR and AR, right now they're disjoint, but even those technologies are starting to become they're starting to come together.
I think it's actually going to be exactly the opposite.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Jim and I remember talked about this a long time ago. And, the meetup was really starting to get a lot of momentum behind it, and things were really rolling. And I realized, this thing isn't going to be around forever. There's not going to be one VR meetup. It would be like, why would you have a meetup about a smartphone or, some other technology?
Automobile club.
Yeah.
You had those in the late 19th century.
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing 5 different VR gaming meetups for 5 different games that people are into, an architecture VR meetup, a medical VR meetup. I just see it fragmenting. When exactly that's going to happen, I don't know. I mean, I guess we've already spawned our first branch for AR, but I think both the AR and VR meetups could easily fragment into 6, 10, 12.
Mm-hmm.
Boston is a great place for meetups. In fact, I think there's a meetup for every single obscure language you've never heard of, a programming language. I mean, there's a lot of tech ones. And it's just a great place for stuff like this to start.
You said that,
Yeah,
Jim.
I would say every meetup could benefit from a little VR.
Absolutely. And one of the things we did over the years, we help other organizations have their events. In fact, we're still doing that. I think there's a hackathon happening almost every month, and they all always come to us for help.
Yeah, and I think that's a good chance to talk about our hackathons and kind of how we run them and what they are. So I think when a lot of people think of a hackathon, they think of a competitive programming event where people stay up all night drinking caffeine and have a contest and there's winners and prizes and all that kind of thing. And we've definitely done those type of hackathons. In fact, Neil was involved with the Reality Virtually hackathon, which is by most accounts the largest ever that's ever happened for VR and AR. But a lot of our smaller monthly ones aren't competitive at all. It's just everyone, kind of the same developers who are making all these local demos, getting together and working on, sometimes in teams, sometimes just alone, learning from one another, again, eating some pizza and having a good time. And I actually enjoy those a lot more. They're definitely a lot easier to plan, that's for sure.
Yep.
You don't need to have a panel of judges. There's it doesn't have to be a 3-day event. Oftentimes they're just 8 hours or an afternoon on a Saturday or something like that. And I really enjoy those. But
Right, they're better for you. It doesn't have to be a grueling slog for 36 hours just so that you can, get a strings attached investment that means you have to work on the same pile of junk for the next 2 years. Burn yourself out, right? No, you're just supposed to have fun and come regularly.
And the cool thing for me, at least about it, is that you have so many VR developers in one spot that if you have trouble with something, there's someone right next to you that's like, oh, here's what you're doing wrong. And it's just a great resource to where you can basically figure things out quicker, even if you have no idea how to do them. So even if you don't know how to program, never used Unity before, you can still show up to those and get something done in a day.
It really reflects kind of the Boston VR mission statement of creating community, as opposed to competition at these events, which you can still have at specific ones, but even the term hackathon, I think that's become pretty broad, right? Like when they first started, it was actually extending a device beyond what it was meant to do, like actually hacking a device. These are, we can call it whatever we want, but it really is like a collaborative session of learning and developing together, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, in a roundabout way, answer that favorite hackathon question, or favorite meetup question. I think that, I want to just say that Boston developers are fantastic. And I think it's because of the local development community and just the passion for VR that people have here that we've grown as big as we have. Boston is a really tiny city, for those of you who haven't been here. And we're actually currently on vr.meetup.com, the 5th largest VR meetup.
In the world.
In the world, right behind London, which is not a small city. And, you can take that for what you will. That's not a very great metric of the size of a meetup. But I think it says a lot for the passion that people have for VR here in Boston and the skills that they have for it. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of brain drain over the years. Some of our members, like Alex Schwartz from Alchemy, creators of Job Simulator, have moved on to different cities. A lot of people going off to the West Coast. Jono was a huge loss. It was hard to say goodbye to him. But I was thinking about Alex because he had brought in Valve, and we had a weekend-long kind of hack event with Valve. And
the VR Bender.
Yeah, the VR Bender. And I can't believe it, but I was not there. That was one of the only meetups that I didn't go to. I had to go to a wedding. But I did go to the event we did after, where everyone showed all their creations. And that was, I think, in addition to Microsoft bringing 50 HoloLenses to town, I think that was a pretty big honor because they had not shown what was to become the HTC Vive anywhere in public ever. The only way to see it was by special invitation and going to their offices. And I think they felt comfortable with us, and they knew that we had some great developers. So they brought these prototypes and set them up in Cambridge and let us use them and create some really fun games on them. And just the sense of excitement that night and that weekend was just so much fun because people had known that they were working on it. People have seen pictures of these offices at Valve with all the fiducial markers all over the walls, but no one had tried it. And we had it. And it was so early on. I should look up what the date was of that meetup, but it was over the summer, I think 2014 or 2015. And man, that was just really, really exciting. My favorite meetup. Either that or the Dome. I think I like the Dome. That was a good
Always
one,
the Dome.
People still talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, so it was just great to have the Jeffs and Jim on the show, and thank you so much for building this community and bringing us all here.
Yeah, they've really done something amazing here. So moving forward, what we really want to do is, as exciting as the Craig and Neil show might be, we really want to be a lot more than that. And we want to highlight what's going on in the community in Boston. What are people doing with VR and AR? So to that point, if you're listening and you're part of that community, please let us know what you're doing with VR and AR so we can get you on the show so you can highlight what you're doing and we can talk about all the things we love to talk about. Craig, what's a good way for people to reach out to us?
Yep. So you can just hit us up at podcast@bostonvr.org. And I also want to point out that even if you're not part of the community, if you're a company that is working, even out on the West Coast, Boston VR, Boston AR are always welcoming new speakers, to the meetups. If you do want to, come out to this very large community and get your name out there. But we would also love to interview you on this show as well. So you don't actually have to be active in the community because we do still want to bring in experts from all these different industries that cross over with VR and AR. But I think what we're going to do format-wise is probably have at least like one expert and one person from the community in each episode going forward.
Cool. So again, that's podcast, singular, at bostonvr.org. I'm Neil Gupta.
And I'm Craig Herndon.
You can find any info in the show notes. Please subscribe on iTunes to listen again, and we'll catch you in this reality
or the next.
Thank you so much for listening. We would like to keep sharing more about VR and AR with you, so please consider a few dollars to our Patreon linked in the show notes. The Virtuality Podcast is produced by Jason Parks and music by Rachel Dazinski. This podcast is in collaboration with Boston VR and Boston AR. Monthly meetups and events can be found on meetup.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @VirtualityCast and learn more at our website, virtuality.show.